Hello, everyone, and welcome to Community Conversations hosted by the Glass Art Society. My name is Brandy Clark, and I'm the Executive Director of GAS, and I want to thank you all for joining us today. For those of you that haven't been to a community conversation before, they are a series of free gatherings that provide a place where we can all come together and discuss critical issues facing our community. Today, we're going to tackle diversity and equity within the Glass community worldwide. We will be recording today's conversation and posting it on our YouTube channel later. So while we hope you keep your camera on, only do so if you feel comfortable. We also will ask that you keep yourselves on mute unless you are speaking. While this is our first community conversation focused on diversity and equity, it will not be our last. We hope that through these conversations, we can bring compassion, understanding, and change to our global community. We also want to acknowledge that some of us are currently on Indigenous lands, and that all across the world, people are dealing with issues of colonialism. Today's conversation will be facilitated by Jeremy Diaz, who is the founder of the Canadian Centre for Gender and Sexual Diversity and the International Day of Pink. In 2019, Jeremy stepped down from his formal role to pursue a master's degree in public policy and administration, but he continues to work with both organizations, as well as the Minister of Women and Gender Equality and the Ontario Human Rights Commission. Jeremy is joining us today from Ottawa, Ontario in Canada, and now I'm going to turn things over to him. Thanks, Jeremy.
Hey, thank you so much. I am so excited. I just want to spend about 3 minutes sharing with you some sort of tone setting thoughts and ideas that I think will help create a more inclusive conversation. So as was mentioned by Brandy, I do volunteer at the International Day of Pink. And as Brandy said, I think it's really important to acknowledge that I'm on unceded Algonquin territory, which means that the territory was taken away and we still don't have modern treaties on the land that I'm on. And for all of those who are engaged in this conversation on, varying states of land, I think it's important not to just recognize that, but to think about that in the context of today's conversation. So I'll encourage you to learn more about the land struggles that we're having, whether it's the development of the pipelines in Colorado, or the fisheries in Eastern Canada, or the ongoing conflict over mining resources in Latin America. I think it's really important to take a second today after the conversation to learn more. And I'm happy to facilitate that conversation. I'd also like to mention that I am bilingual, so I speak both French and English. And si vous avez des questions dans une autre langue, certainement les poser et on va les répondre. But today's conversation will be in English. I also want to do just a second to mention the tone of today's conversation. While this conversation will be posted, I think it's really important to recognize that when you're sharing the stories and the learning that you got from this space, that the stories that are being shared are of those people who are presenting and those moderators and those speakers. And so remember to speak for yourselves when you have questions. And as such, I want to honor you and recognize that we are in a braver space. And so you're in a space where you're challenging yourself to take in information that you're not familiar with, and you're being brave by taking advantage of this space to continue your learning goals. As such, I want to remind us all that we are all welcome in this space. All questions are encouraged, and that when we're hearing a question that maybe doesn't resonate with us, or when we hear a statement or a comment that doesn't resonate with us, I encourage us all to approach those feelings with an air of interrogation. So as opposed to dismissing it, or as opposed to perhaps not resonating with it, give yourself the benefit or the opportunity to question how that feels and why maybe that might feel uncomfortable or unsettling. Recognize that we are all on different learning journeys. So some questions might be things that you've dealt with already or that you're dealing with every day. So please be kind to one another and recognize that learning journeys are different. I also wanted to mention that if you have any questions that you want to submit anonymously, you can do so via WhatsApp or text by just sending me a quick message. All messages after the conversations are over will be deleted, so I will not save any of your information, and I will not know who you are because you're texting me from all over the world. And then just finally, I want to recognize that we are living in a society that is intersected with axes of privilege and domination and oppression. And what does that mean? It means that as people who have different and varied lived experiences, oppression, intentional or unintentional, systemic or secondary or offhand, intersects each one of us in different ways. And it creates a society where we're seeing communities experiencing different levels of oppression, and that oppression is becoming this lived experience where folks do not have equal access or opportunity to certain uh, opportunities to advance their experiences in our society. This experience of oppression has lasted so long that now we are seeing the oppression becoming normalized in our system. And over the last few months, I think we've reached another breaking point in our society where people are starting to ask questions about how do we dismantle these systems of oppression, not just in institutions, but within communities and then ourselves as well. I want to mention that the cycle of oppression is something that's folded into our society, and we are all parts of it. So we justify it, we allow institutions to perpetuate it, and we allow misinformation, especially, to guide it. And I think for us, our learning journeys are different. For some of us, we believe in an old system where if you have power, you should keep it. And if you don't have power, you should accept the state you're in. But I like to challenge ourselves by thinking of power as these blocks of these people watching this wonderful soccer game and thinking about, well, what happens if we distribute it equally? Does that solve our problem? How about if we distribute it equitably? What problems are solved? I also like to question what happens when we get rid of the fence or get rid of the barriers or invite people to just participate. And by challenging how we approach power, we can actually create cycles of liberation where we're building community and creating change. Now, this very last sentence, I just want to mention is something that we've adopted already when it comes to recycling. In many of our communities across the world, we are recycling and we are composting and we're putting our plastics in the right bin. And I think similar to how we approach diversity and inclusion and diversity and acceptance, we need to start looking at it as something that we do every day. That is part of our daily lives, and that's something that will evolve. How we do diversity, inclusion, and respect and liberation today will be different in the future. And this, of course, requires both surface conversations and deeper conversations, and fundamentally requires creating a sense of cultural safety. So moving beyond the process of saying that we want to be inclusive or kind or diverse, but into a space where we actually fundamentally understand and support the experiences of all kinds of people. This is about looking at people not just as lines or as communities, but as the diverse experiences that they bring to the table. So again, I just want to share with you that phone number in case you have any questions. And I want to jump right into the talk. So I just want to start off with our panelists. The first thing we're going to do is just invite them to introduce ourselves. So I guess, Kimberly, do we want to start with you?
Sure. Yes. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Kimberly Keith, and I'm the Executive Director at Hilltop Artists, which is an organization, a youth development organization in Tacoma, Washington. We use glass art to connect young people from diverse socio-economic and cultural backgrounds to better futures. And so our purpose is not to create fantastic glass artists, it's to create fantastic people through learning about glass art. And so that's me, and that's what I do.
Fantastic. And you've actually done your PhD. I thought your research was incredibly interesting because you did focus on the experiences of diverse people. Do you want to just maybe hint at that? I know you'll probably end up talking about it shortly, but like, is there something that you want to maybe draw out of that?
My research was in in sociology, not in art or museum studies, but
oh yeah, sorry, I apologize. Yeah, of course.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
I researched how art museums engage with the other. And so I looked at different others, but mostly Black people. I'm mixed race, African American, and I did my PhD in London. And so I was looking at Black British interaction with art museums and African American interaction in America, in Seattle and New York. And at the staff level, the board level, the audience level, and then also in issues of representation with artists. And so I was just really interested in that because, as some of you may know, I helped to start the Museum of Glass in Tacoma, and we did a lot of interesting outreach programs in the beginning. And then all of a sudden, my position was eliminated at the museum because of funding issues. So I had all these questions about soft funding that was tied to working with specific audiences, how when that money went away, the relationships went away, even though a lot of museums had in their missions that they wanted to work with diverse audiences and with all these different folks. And so I wanted to see, is it the money that's driving the engagement, or is there a real engagement? Is it the same in other countries, etc.? And so long-winded answer, but there you go.
No, you know what? And I don't think it's a long-winded answer. I actually think it's really interesting how you ask those questions, right? Because fundamentally, one of the key things that we want to talk about today is if we want to incorporate glass into the mainstream, if we want to incorporate diversity into the glass mainstream, we need to ask ourselves, where is the prioritization of people of color, diverse communities, and as you asked in your research, of Black people, right? And I mean, these are really fundamental questions, which brings me to Elmira. You're in Portugal. Your work has really focused on that intersectionality of the stories that you bring to the table. Do you mind introducing yourself and sharing some of those stories?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm so pleased to with you. I'm Elmira Abolhasani. I'm an Iranian artist. Since 9 years ago, I've been living in Portugal, Lisbon. So officially right now I'm like Iranian Portuguese artist. And the subject that I am working on, which I want to call it 3 rings of a single chain: identity, communication, and self-reflection. So this is the base of all my works, exhibition, and researching project.
And in your research, right, but also in your art, I feel like you not only are you saying something, but you're trying to say it by doing things differently. Do you mind just speaking to that?
Well, yeah, because when I moved to Portugal, maybe the glass society I've been there, it was very international. I had a colleague from Guatemala, Colombia, Brazil, Finland, Algeria. Can't remember, but we were very, very international group. So the first question for myself, it was, where are you in a new society? Where is your position? What do you want to do? So like digging more layer of myself and trying to finding my position. And then during the conversation that we all every day we had with together, I think that I found myself more and more and try to understand other people. And yeah, so it was the first step. And then I try to continue that because I came from a country that we also are hosting lots of other people from different countries. Mm-hmm. Most of them are from Afghanistan. And in some period of time, we hosted almost 6 million Afghan in our country. And right now, during last 3 years, I'm working on this subject as well.
Yeah, and I think that's, I mean, we'll get back to that in a sec, but like, I just want to underscore, if you haven't had a chance to check out Elmira's website, I really encourage you to look to see how that sort of like the layers of the stories that you're bringing to the table and those layer experiences really come together. I think it's beautiful. All right, Leo, I would love for you to introduce yourself. And I think it actually speaks really well because you tend to work in a lot of mediums, but mostly found and constructed pieces. So could you maybe share with us a bit about yourself, but also how you came to decide to use those found mediums? Because that's the part of your work that I find incredibly interesting.
Hi, I'm Leo Tecosky. I'm in Brooklyn right now. I don't know that I would say that I'm a mixed media artist. I actually do primarily work in glass. Oftentimes I incorporate found and constructed items, but my main focus is the material of glass and the crafts and traditions associated with it. And a lot of my work involves research in technique and tradition, but also a deconstruction of those traditions as well to sort of stake a claim in the glass canon.
Sorry, I was on mute. I was talking and I was on mute. This is the trouble with Zoom. And I mean, to say, I guess what I was trying to say when I was talking about how you created these found objects, when I was, and so I'm not a glass expert, but when I was looking at your art, one of the pieces I was extremely moved by was around the orange sort of circular objects that object really spoke to me in the sense of its sort of beauty and simplicity and design. And I think one of the things I was learning about and talking to my cousin, whose birthday it is today, and I hope she's on the call, but she's a glassblower. She was talking about how difficult it is to create these pieces of perfection, and how challenging it is to create this type of art. And so the application of, you know, generations of best practice, but also to create that skill level is something that you've mastered. Is that something you could speak to?
Sure. I mean, thank you. I wouldn't consider myself a master by any means. Surely a student of the medium, but that's a sort of dedication to mastery, I think, is important. But I'm not really seeking out the maestro status of a Venetian glassblower or even a Scandinavian master. But I am interested in conquering the material to say what I want to say in the way that I want to say it. And so I find that I'm, having continued success and continued research.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So I guess I want to maybe bring it out to the broader audience right now. Today's conversation is really about diversity and equity in glass and in glass blowing and in glass creation. And what have we all done to sort of foster that diversity and inclusion? And so Brandy's actually going to put up a poll right now. And I'm just curious to find out how many of you have had conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and how you feel those conversations have gone. We're going to put that up for about a minute. Oh, look at that. I love seeing the results coming in. So far, a lot of people have had this conversation. Some of it's gone well, some of it's gone not so well. But I think, where we are on our individual and community learning journeys is really important, because this conversation is, of course, the gateway to creating action around these issues. And just before we get to those poll results, I want to go back to you, Elmira, and really talk about, like, within your region and the sector of glass that you're working in, could you talk about the unique challenges, but also the opportunities you see around, this diversity and equity sphere that we're starting to see continue to grow, but also achieve this like sort of like public attention in a way that we haven't seen before?
Well, yeah, opportunity. Yeah, I think that it has two sides, some challenges, yeah, but it has absolutely some opportunities. For me, the most challenge was maybe you have to explain everything that is a part of you or a part of your identity every day sometimes, and you have to explain that why you are doing this or why you don't eat, for example, bad things or everything. But then it had some opportunity because I came from another part of the world, and usually people from West, sometimes they are not very curious, or they don't feel need that we have to know about other countries or about this. This is just based off my experience. But you came from another part of the world that it is a part of the reality of these days. And you have some experiences that might other people don't have. And you saw some of those. So absolutely, it was my inspiration subject. I mean, my homeland, it brought lots of subject to my art and to my subjects that I'm working on.
And so when you talk about that incorporation of diversity and equity and of course these interesting stories of oppression, but also of great liberation, how do you capture that in your work? And how do you capture that in your practice of art?
Yeah, for me, working with glass, it's like Sufi dance or praying. So while I'm working with glass, it's like meditating, yoga, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. So, and then it is just time that give me, specifically glass with their unique character, with the transparency, clarity, that you can see through that, and how it can be fluid and solid in the next 2 seconds. So it means a lot for me. And then I'm trying to working with glass and finding myself, and sometimes like come back to my memory and memories, and so merge all of them.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I'm just going to take a second and share the polling results for everyone to take a quick peek at. And I think it's interesting that many of us have had this conversation. A number of us have had a conversation that's gone well. Some of us have had a conversation that's gone poorly, and others have not had a conversation. And I want to go to Leo because I feel like, you're someone who is incorporating this diversity and inclusion in your work, but also in your life and in your own personal lived experiences. Just, first off, do you have any thoughts on the results of the poll? And could you also speak to the question of where are the opportunities for us to see diversity and equity in glass?
I think it's kind of interesting. I'm curious to like what the anecdotal stories are about conversations that have gone badly. Because I wonder what the conversation was about specifically. Zooming out a little bit, I've worked and taught in lots of places over the years, and have found that diversity is not necessarily a top priority, and that sort of the culture of the public access studio which I think maybe comes from the higher learning pipeline, become places of like homogenous sort of groups of glassmakers. And that can be a very alienating experience to anybody who's interested in something different. And that's something that I've talked about when I have conversations of diversity and equity is how, maybe why, but also how we can address that, some of the toxic culture that exists in those spaces. And often they revolve around topics of entitlement and privilege, economics, but it has to be more explicit than that. It has to be a lot deeper than that. There's no way it's so black and white that like white males are rich and everybody else is poor. So there's no way that like, not to speak about my own socioeconomic background, but I did not come from poverty, but I am singled out when it comes to particular spaces within the glass world. And that's the conversation that I have with people, is why the studio glass movement was able to proliferate into that concept.
You know, and it's interesting that you say that, right? Because if it was just economics, if it was just this like either or thing, then we could fix it. But you're right, it's not. This experience of oppression and othering is so layered. So Kimberly, you know, I'm going to put it on you to just maybe expand on that layered idea of oppression, but also privilege. And I think this is brilliant because it goes back to your research. Do you mind maybe speaking to that and how we start to deconstruct those layers and how we start to deconstruct those layers of oppression?
Well, I think we're absolutely right in saying that this is a really complex subject. And also, those layers are integrated. I mean, intersectionality is real. And I can't separate being a woman from being a Black woman. You know, I can't separate being from the Hilltop and being from poverty myself from, you know, how I think about the world in terms of class and whatnot. And so I think the key is just to keep it forefront of your mind and don't assume that everybody is the same as you. We just can't do that. And thinking about Hilltop artists and thinking about glass in general, program was started in 1994 in response to things that were going on in the community. So if you go back 26 years in Tacoma, there was a lot of meth houses. There was a lot of gang activity and just a lot of crime and stuff going on in the Hilltop. A lot of kids just hanging out on corners doing nothing really. And so Hilltop artists started to bring those kids in and give them something to do. A lot of those kids were kids of color. And so that idea of working with diverse young people is at the core of our mission and the core of what we do. We continue to do that today. And some of those complexities come from the studio glass movement, you know, and the Italian tradition. It was white dudes, and God love them, Harvey Littleton, Dale Chihuly, all of them brought that movement to the States and into these college programs and then built up this studio glass movement. But it was what it was. It was a bunch of white guys doing what white guys knew. And that's how it started. And you got Thurman Statham and some other people that were there at the beginning that diversified it a little bit, but it was that's what it was. And then even Hilltop artists, it was Dale and some other people in the community that started Hilltop artists. And so even our diverse program, which is a feeder program to many studios and many other educational programs in the country, that was started in what my opinion is a white savior complex. And so these complexities of diversity and working with people of color are also, that's inherent in our program as well. And so we need to talk about that consistently and pull it apart. I think some of the key issues are a willingness to have transparent conversations about these things and not be in denial of where we came from and where we want to go with young people and with the field. You know, I said earlier that we aren't in the business of making great artists. We do make great artists, and we do have quite a few of them in glassblowing programs across the country. And that is really important because that's our effort to diversify this field that started in this, you know, white male colonial bubble. And so I know I drew from like 32 different things there. And so I hope I made a little bit of sense.
No, and you know, it's interesting because as I did research in preparing for this presentation, you know, as someone who identifies as queer and trans and a person of color, you know, one of the things that I thought was really interesting for me and in glassblowing is, as a young person growing up as queer and trans and a person of color, I was really excited about identifying as gay because I was like, oh my gosh, there's this movement and there's this culture and there's these people and there's stuff going on and I'm part of it. And then when I started connecting to leadership and community, it was a lot of, you know, cisgender white men who were running these organizations, who were leading this movement, who were recognized in this movement. In Ottawa, for example, we had a history project go up recently. We you know, put, you know, flag poles on all of our flag posts in the gay village, and they all have photos of leaders in our community. There's 2 people of color and there's 2 women out of 50 flag poles. And you're sort of thinking, wow, you know, like, where do I fit into this conversation, into this community? And so similar to glass art, and I don't want to just say glass blowing because there's so many layers to glass, but similar to glass art, you know, there's this tradition and history of colonialism of a certain gender and a certain background of people doing it. So how do we crack that open? And I think we're at the forefront right now of having those conversations. So I'm going to go back to Leo and sort of talk about, you know, from your experience, you know, how are you cracking open these conversations? How are you, you know, creating this positive change? And where do you see yourself in this movement?
Existence is resistance. That's how we're doing it. So, you know, I work hard and I get opportunities. So when I get opportunities, then I sort of push my way around and open up the door for the peers and colleagues that I think have the same agenda, straight up, which is inclusion, period. And so some places are interested in that, some places aren't. And I think what I've been doing over time is finding out the institutions that are real and the people that are real who are interested in listening, or conversely have something else to offer within that framework. It's interesting to find out where those gems are, and it's great to start to build that network in a way that opens up opportunities for the youth and the young people that I encounter when I'm in, you know, working at Tyler in Philly, or teaching a workshop at Urban Glass, or just working out of the studio in Newark, New Jersey at Glass Roots. Encountering people who want to know more, learn more, be involved more, and whether they know it or not, they won't have the same feelings of alienation, because I'll hopefully be able to guide them to the right spots. Not to say that I want to like cushion anybody's like trip into this harsh world of glassmaking, but I will be there to tell people where not to go, certainly. And so I found that has been like an interesting approach to creating a safe space. I'm coming up on 40 years old now. I've been doing a lot over time to make myself feel safe, wherever it is, and in whatever context that may be. And safe, comfortable, whatever you want to call it. And so now I've been able to sort of see some of the markers, right? Like, rather than roll into a spot and deal with 3 weeks of microaggression before I leave, I can calculate a lot of that beforehand. And that's kind of the information that I want to be able to share with anybody who's interested in partaking in an inclusive future. Because that's a lot of energy wasted when you could be jumping over that spot and heading to the other spot. And that's difficult because a lot of spots are shiny and they're sparkly, and they got all the best glass art and all the best glass blowers that have ever been through there. But I've been trying to, in my work, and educate myself in changing that mindset. I've had to reprogram myself a lot too. I was somehow able to compartmentalize my glass making and learning with my separately from my own thoughts of systemic subversion. And recently I've been able to merge those two, because I've been able to convince myself that they're not in mission, and they rely on each other, my own survival. So I would impart that sort of information and be able to consider that something that is beneficial to the community. And what that does is it inevitably starts to spread the narrative of what a proper glass institution is. And it breaks it down from 3 to 33. And everybody can have a place to be and do the things that they want to do. And the lower 27 off that list of 30 are now like your graphic that you showed earlier. Like, that's what I'm trying to do, man. I'm ripping down the fence is interesting, but I would rather put a couple apple boxes underneath some of these spots that already exist, and maybe even turn them around to face the other direction, because there's another game in town.
And I think what's really interesting is you've hit on so many points. And I just want to just ask you, if you don't mind sharing, because I think what you've hinted at is really important, that part of your experience as a glassblower has been traumatic, not because you've burned yourself on a glory hole, but because you've experienced oppression, racism, and discrimination in your space that you should be able to feel free and welcome and accepted. So could you speak to how you've built that resiliency within yourself to be able to deal with those difficult situations?
Well, like I said, I mean, like, I had a compartmentalization problem at one point. Like, at a certain, you're raised to be able to deal with racism. You have to. If you separate that from something else, then you're not going to see what's happening in the other part of your world. And I think it took a little bit of age as I got older, as my peers, my colleagues got older, we got agency in different areas and different arenas, and we were able to provide for each other, share with each other, and enable each other. And that brought about a certain amount of reflection to understand some of the more subtle nuance of that conflict. I mean, like, yes, in Glass World, I experienced like straight up face-to-face black-white racism, but in Glass schools, I also like experienced very subtle, differentiating, othering racism that was easy to compartmentalize because I was in there doing my thing, learning my trade, getting my skills, honing my craft. And now that I can do it and my people can do it, we don't need that crap. And we don't need to deal with that anymore. So, so it's called dealing with it and then fucking over it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that's critical. I mean, that resilience is really critical. Elmira, I want to go to you now and ask you about your resilience to it, because I think, especially from where you are geographically located, but also where you grew up, that required an entirely, similar skill of resiliency to deal with the challenges that you're facing. And can you share with me, how you've addressed them, but also, how you've enabled to create that positive space and that positive community?
First of all, I think that I should be very thankful because in our school, it wasn't tough anymore. And I didn't feel any I can't remember any bad thing. But I think that what I did, it was try hard, work hard, and try to show everyone that you are very seriously about your work. Because I think that I came from a very long way to be here and be a part of this community. And I don't know lots of other Iranian glass artists in an international. I know some, but there are not a lot like other countries. So I think that, try hard, build your network, and knock all the door. Someone will open one of them. And it was my way. What I did, it was.
And where did you find that inner strength to just keep knocking? Because I found that when I worked in diversity and inclusion, I found myself to burn out sometimes. I found myself to lose that energy or that light. Could you maybe, Elmira, speak to that where do you get that energy from? Where do you get that light from to keep pushing?
Remember the all bad moments that you already had, and now you are here and you have a long way to go. And where is your goal? Where are you? So then you have energy. And I am so lucky to have a very nice family and husband. And all the time supporting me and telling me that you can do if every other person can do. And hey, I came from a family that my mom, she is a very strong woman. She is one of the best manager in our country. So you have to, I didn't have any other way if I compare myself with my family, with my mom, with my uncles. And so I had this opportunity to live in another country, to be in the art society and glass society. So I think that there is no excuse for me to be depressed or think if other people, because they don't know me or my background, they don't have a correct action with me. So yeah, I continue my work.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So I'm going to take this now to Kimberly, and I'm going to ask you, we're hearing that resiliency, we're hearing that pushing forward is a critical part of how we create change in the glass-blowing community. What else is needed? Because you were at the forefront of this museum project, you were at the forefront of these youth projects. What else did you pull in so that you could create that change?
I think one thing that's really important to remember is that, yes, resiliency and individualism is part of the secret sauce, but we're in situations of systemic racism and oppression, and it's systems and years and generations. And we need to be cognizant of that. I meet with so many people who, they see what's right in front of them and they've not questioned any of that history. They've never questioned those systems. And I think it's interesting that this year we've had so many productive community conversations around race and around gender and around the history of race and gender in America. And so people are starting to be open to those concepts and are researching a little bit. And so for me, I totally get what Leo was saying about, we have to compartmentalize when we go through the door and we make a way. And like Elmira says, we have to be resilient and we follow our path, and we can have those blinders on for a bit. But I think we get to a point, or at least I got to a point where I had to take the blinders off. And then I have to stand in that space of, I know it sounds cliche these days, but Gandhi said it best. We have to be the change we want to see in the world. And so I'm creating change at Hilltop. Part of the world that's really important to me, as lots of people on this call know, is Pilchuck. And so Pilchuck has some systemic issues. And so I need to put my money where my mouth is. And so I joined the DEAI committee at Pilchuck. And I've just been there for a couple of meetings, and I'm very transparent. And so I say things how I see it, and then hope that the conversation can unfold. And I think we've had some people that have they've thought of some things that they hadn't thought of before, and so I have to put myself in that uncomfortable position to have those conversations. And that, I know that is an individual stand as well, Jeremy. I know that I want to talk a little bit about broader things, and because it's not about individual resilience, it's about systems and stuff. But
yeah,
I just know that I am a person that I always lean in, I don't lean back. And so this, this is difficult if there's a drunk person that wants to fight you on the street, because I'm like, you want a piece of this? I don't hang back and not get involved. I go there. And so, and I understand that's not for everyone.
Well, and I think what's interesting about your research, and again, I don't want to push too hard, but I think people should read what you've written. But I think for me, what I think is interesting is that there's this place for individual resiliency, right? Like we need diverse people, like queer, trans, people of different ethnic backgrounds or origins or experiences. We need them to be strong so that when they get into these spaces of oppression, that they can stand up and they can push back. They can knock that door down. They can create new spaces. They can identify problematic spaces and find alternative spaces. We need strong individuals of marginalized experience, but I think we also need to look at the systems of oppression and dismantle them. And I think that goes back to what you were talking about with the museum, right? Where we had these equity, diversity commitments, and then as soon as, crisis or challenge has hit, and we're seeing this globally with COVID, right? As soon as diverse, challenges have hit, the first departments to go are diversity and equity and human rights. They're all getting cut left, right, and center. And so what is it going to take? And I'm going to ask you, Kim, Bradley, what is it going to take for us to prioritize this equity and inclusion? Because fundamentally, right, either this is a priority or it isn't. And how do we make it that priority that it should be?
Well, what I found during my comparative analysis of a lot of different organizations is that you have to have buy-in from the top. The top, they can't necessarily set the agenda and the what that's going to happen. But if you don't have buy-in from leadership, whether that's an individual or a board or whatever, the organization and the systems within the organization and the organizational culture is not going to change. We've all been involved with being that middle manager or that teacher working in the middle and wanting to do this great thing for this organization and carrying that on our backs forward, but not making any long-term change for the organization. It's because there wasn't buy-in at the top.
And how do you get buy-in at the top? Because that's the like, I don't want to cut you off, but I do want to ask, how do we get buy-in at the top? How do we make predominantly, cis white dudes understand that this is not just a passion, this is not just something I do on the weekends, this is who I am?
I don't know how everybody does it. I just know how Kim did it, okay? And I told you that my position was eliminated years ago, and it made me question the system. And I had those questions, and so I said, I'm going to go research this, because one day I'm going to be the person that's in charge, and I don't want to make that decision.
Yeah.
And so I want to do it better. And so now I am, a Hilltop woman of color, come back from being in the UK, leading an organization in Tacoma. And I take that really seriously. I am my students at Hilltop Artists. I am the example of what they can do if they want to do it. And so I, as an individual, have to take that stand. And so I would say we all need to commit to taking that stand and doing what our passion tells us, and that is really important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's brilliant. Now we're going to open up for some Q&A time. This is my favorite part, so I'm hoping that folks will have some really good questions. Feel free to add them to the chat, or if you want, you can take yourself off a mute and jump right in. Of course, there's also the option of sending an anonymous text or WhatsApp message to me directly, should you want to do that. And we have our first question coming in for Leo. Leo, can you, so I just got an anonymous text. The question is, when thinking about your experiences as a person of color, what do you think it is inside of you that motivated you to keep pushing, to keep fighting, even though you have expressed or experienced adversity and challenges? Oh, and okay, and there's a follow-up. And where did you learn it?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think rather than sort of like talk about, I think like that like addressing that, the concept of overcoming oppression is important, but it's not like a unique experience of mine. Unfortunately, that question is like the first question every time. And frankly, I'm not really interested in answering that question. I would rather talk about why institutions are making people ask me that question. So why do you think, to the person that asked that question, why do you think I've been made to go through those questions of myself, and how would you come up against something like that?
Sorry, that's a really good answer. And I think getting each one of us to look into ourselves and think about these questions is really critical. So Lisa Duggan had a really good question, and I'm going to put that to you, Elmira, or anyone on the panel. You know, are there leaders and models in the glass world, you know, present company included, or individuals or organizations who are creating equity that we can maybe learn from or that we can tap into?
Elmira, you're muted.
Can you hear me now? And I didn't, Jeremy, I didn't hear your question. Can you repeat it?
Oh, I apologize. The question was, are there leaders or role models in the glass world, or individuals or organizations who are creating equity?
Well, I don't know, because I think that honestly, I see myself more as a individual artist. So I don't know if I know all the glass community to answer this question. But I think that we are basically under the whole human network. So what is happening in a whole society, it's happening in our society as well.
Yeah. Kimberly, did you want to try and answer that question?
I think there's a lot of organizations who are questioning and trying to get there now. I don't think, I can't recall one in my personal experience that's actually creating equity right now. Even my own organization, we have been, you know, concertedly working on this just since the pandemic started, because now we had some time. And so we've been meeting twice a month for 2 hours with an outside specialist guiding us through an equity process. And so it takes that kind of time and determination to do it. And so, I don't know, I think some of the models that I have been looking to have been local, and they've been more in the social services. And folks, we do a lot of work with the juvenile court system. And so there's a lot of great organizations that are working on alternatives to detention. And so they are achieving some equity in how they're working with young people, that I think is really great. But everybody's just waking up and is pretty new to this. And so.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting. I do think that incorporating the social services and equity specialists into these conversations is critical, because I think, as Leah was mentioning, this is not just a conversation about, you know, inclusion. It is fundamentally about creating a space where we're changing the hearts and minds of individuals. Because I think fundamentally, and this goes back to your research, Kimberly, if we are just, you know, kicking out the bad guys from the system, where are they going to go, right? It's about rehabilitating the community that is glassblowing. And so I think that leads perfectly into our next question, which asks, you know, how do we get more Black and brown folks into glass? How do we eliminate the gatekeeping in schools, in public studios? I apologize. And especially around the privileged expensiveness of the craft, right? I mean, whether we like to admit it or not, glass blowing is super expensive. So how do we create those inroads for folks of color who, let's be honest, are statistically in certain places around the world disenfranchised? Does anyone on the panel want to jump in on this?
I just use us as an example. Our programs are offered for free. And I know that not everybody has that commitment to do that, but we work with 650 kids a year, middle school, high school, and young adult, and everything we do is for free. And so I spend most of my time raising funds and meeting people and talking to them about our vision and our mission and encouraging them to support us. And so I know that that isn't everybody's cup of tea or what they want to do, but a lot of the barriers have to do with economics and class, more so than race or gender even. And so, or at least that's my opinion. And so breaking down those barriers, and you start at the nuts and bolts. And so like, you need money, raise some money. You want to build a studio, raise some money, build a studio. And there's a lot of really great public glass places around the country, and a lot of folks that are doing it.
Can I add something to that, Kim?
Yeah, please.
Of course.
I think that you're absolutely right. That is like, I think, one of the tiers. Public access studios that I can think of, at least the ones that are sort of in the zeitgeist of the glass conversation, almost exclusively in neighborhoods of at least mixed race, but definitely lower income neighborhoods of color, Black and brown. And the outreach that happens at those studios is a little bit fluffy right now. And if you can raise money to make room for that, that's just like starting the car. There's so much more that needs to happen with that. The space inside of those studios needs to be made, needs to be modified, and the behavior of the community within those studios also needs to be examined and questioned. Because I think that I have seen when there are cases made to make space for inclusion within studios, and that same alienation that I was talking about before remains present within those spaces. And regardless if access is free, people want to turn around and walk right out. So I think that studios, specifically public access, and then universities to another extent, they need to really be doing way more than they perceive to be doing at the moment. And I think that includes offering vocational opportunities, long-standing, long-lasting legacy opportunities for the neighborhoods that these public access studios are in, that incorporate everybody in the studio, not just people making glass, people buying the glass, and people selling the glass. Because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about the thing. And that thing is going to be the thing that funds the rest of the things. So why not get that to be a complete cycle where you've got individuals making glass, the people selling the glass are paying the individuals that are making the glass, and the people designing it are getting, you know what I'm saying? Like this multi-tiered cyclical program.
You know, Leo, oh, sorry. Like you're saying something really interesting, right? Because like whenever I go to a glass exhibition, you know, who are the people who are buying the art? You know, are they reflective of the diversity of our community? And I think that's a really interesting and important question we need to ask ourselves. Kimberly, were you going to say something to that?
I was just going to add to what Leo was saying, because that whole system that he just described, that takes time, and that is a long-term vision. And so even before, you know, I was on this DEI committee that's new at Pilchuck, 4.5 years ago, there was an incident with a Hilltop student that was very, very bad, very negative. And so when I started, one of the things we started doing is there was an internship that was a Hilltop student of color working with Pilchuck after that initial incident, because Pilchuck didn't have a person of color on staff, hadn't worked with a young person that had come from this kind of a background. And so we had a young person that wanted to learn about arts management. And so it was like, great. So we're going to start with this little individual relationship. And then we started with doing these retreats with our students, bringing groups of our students to Pilchuck to work with their staff. And then I would go up early and I would do a little training on like, how do you work with, what is social and emotional learning? What are adverse childhood experiences? How do you work with people that are different? And so we do that twice a year now. And I see the organization incrementally moving forward. And now there's this DEI committee that I think is really committed to doing some work. And so, but I mean, I've been in my post for 3.5 years, and it's the incremental little change, and it's creating the relationship, building on that relationship so that, 10 years from now, I'll be able to look at the Pilchuck staff and I'll see people of color on it. And I will have seen an organizational cultural shift at that organization. But it takes time. Yeah, systemic change takes time.
We're talking 100 years of systemic change. Like,
oh yeah,
I agree with you. But it absolutely starts with somebody like you in a position of agency to say this has to happen, and it's not a band-aid. It's a long-term systemic goal, and I think that's part of the thinking that needs to be happening now while people are in these discussions. I think it's important to mention and talk about things in those terms, not necessarily in terms of how we're going to deal with it this fall, this winter, over the next year, over the next 5 years, but how are we never going to have to do this again?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I will give that some snaps.
I want to take it back. Yeah, I want to definitely snaps. But I want to take it to another question that we got from the University of Miami, asking saying that they've enacted some anti-racism programming, and they're interested in knowing if the panel has any specifically successful programming that they think should be highlighted in the conversation. Anyone? Leo's like, I could say something.
It's not, I don't know. I don't really know much about programming specifically or like pedagogical approaches. But I think like what I keep coming to, as I also have been working on some of these other panels and working with committees to just talk about language and figure out like what it's going to take and how we're going to prove that we're thinking differently and forwardly, is to just outright state that, one, we are anti-racist, and two, anything that is not anti-racist is racist, and there's no place for B. I realize that in an educational setting that you've got to deliver that within a pedagogical context, but I also think that sometimes you can bypass that particular essence of teaching. And that in itself can be a tool to state that there is fundamentally no room for any other thinking within the parameters of moving forward. And I think that is a way to approach education in an honest way, and doesn't it doesn't leave any room for interpretation.
I'm seeing a lot in the chat where people are agreeing with you, Leo and Kimberly, so I think that's fantastic. Scout added that in Philly, they're actually having weekly anti-racism meetings. And it's funny that you say that, because I fundamentally believe that the future of the anti-racism movement is really that cycle of liberation where fundamentally it's not going to be a one and done solution, but rather an ongoing commitment to equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility, where every single day or week or month we're learning about something new and we're confronting those challenges head on, and we're folding those experiences into ourselves as human beings and constantly reinforcing that positive. I think, in this, especially digital media age where there's so much information and especially so much misinformation out there, it's really critical that we create these spaces for regular conversations on diversity, equity, inclusion, and do that commitment to learning about the experiences of other people. And so tying that back to the experiences of other people, and Elmira, you've been a little bit quiet. Do you want to add something into this conversation and really speak about, if possible, how you are folding this equity and inclusion into your work and your practice every day? I think that for me in reading your work was really interesting. Do you mind commenting on that?
Yeah, but before that, I think that for the other question, it was how we can engage while glass society is very expensive. I want to add something. Right, glass society is very expensive, but blowing is more expensive than other type of glass. If we give a vision to students, then they even can be a part of this society with a dreamer, right? And they can make a incredible work. So for me as an artist, I think having a vision, know that what you want and what you want to create and what you want to share with other people, this is the most important part. And this is the hardest part of the artist job. And then you can create or ask other people to even make your piece. So yeah, I just wanted to add this, but yeah. And then your question about what was that? How
how are you, like, on a day, like your work speaks to this constant experience of diversity, and it's interesting for me because when I look at glass and glass arts, there seems to be a very specific market for a specific set of stories, and you have not conformed to that set of stories. You've said, I'm going to tell my story, I'm going to be authentic to myself.
Yeah.
So there's less profit, there's less financial reward, potentially less artistic awards and acknowledgement, especially from certain juries and certain artistic competitions. How do you keep going? Like, how do you continue to wake up every morning and continue to do what you love, knowing that you're constantly being pushed down?
Yeah, right. Because I have a goal, and through the understanding more art and specifically art, not just glass, I can find myself more and more. And this is the purpose of living for me, to understanding Elmira better and make a better Elmira and be a better node in the whole system. Because I believe that if I be a better person in the whole system, then I can have a better reflection in the whole system. So this is my responsibility to the work. So, and so I try to understand while I'm working, while I'm trying to understand more art, I can find myself more and more. So this is a part of me. But then thinking about everything that my society or my country gave me, and they are a part of me and they are very valuable for me. And then always asking myself that then what you can do for other, or what is your share for the society. So this is my motivation.
That's fantastic. That is truly incredible. I just want to loop back to one last question, which actually I got the same question a couple times from a couple people on my phone. Are there any social services or equity organizations that we should be aware of that are doing good work? And for many of the panelists, but it was specifically asked of you, Kimberly, is there anyone that we should really tap into to help us out?
Well, what I'm thinking about in my area, because I work on quite a few collaborative projects, the YWCA in Tacoma is doing some really great stuff. The Boys and Girls Club here in Tacoma, there's probably a Boys and Girls Club in your community. They do have a national equity plan, but then they also have local ones within that. Those are two. And then there's a small nonprofit in Tacoma, Our Sister's House. I think they do a really great job. Yeah.
You know,
And
I love that you, like, I feel like, you know, those are great organizations, but I feel like that the thing I heard a lot was local, right? Connecting locally, and connecting to local resources and local organizations. I think that for me is so important, because when we connect locally, we're able to really understand the community and where folks are coming from.
Oh yeah,
So-
and to do collaboration, I think that is really important, and genuine collaboration, not coordination. It's not me asking 10 organizations to do something for me. It's about really digging in and working together. And so that's really important.
Oh, that's beautiful. So I want to bring this back, because we're way over time. But I kind of want to, you know, for those of you whose questions I haven't gotten to, I apologize. But I do want to sort of like lead us into some sort of closing. And I think the question I was really interested in is, and I'll ask this of all the panelists, how do you balance that immediacy with that systemic social breaking down of the challenges that we're facing? Like, I want the world to be better right now, but like, I know it can't be, because it's about slowly changing hearts and minds. So as that's the case, how do we get there? And I think, you know, Leo, why don't we go with you?
Read some books, go to history, read about anybody oppressed, either the last 50 years or the last 5,000 years. This is not new. We keep saying this isn't new, and it's not going to be old anytime soon. So read.
Elmira, do you want to add something? Like, what's some things people can do right now, make a difference?
Ask themselves that all the time, ask themselves that if everything that I know is true, and am I under the bombard of the wrong news? And
Yes.
yeah, and ask themselves, because the things that I struggled with more, it was the lack of the information with the people that were around me, or some people, they had just a wrong information and it was worse. And the worst scenario was the people that they had just a bit about, for example, my background, and then they asked me that, hey, come, and then I want to explain that who you are. And it was the worst scenario. So yeah, please ask yourself, maybe the things that you think is not true.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, and I think what's really interesting about information today is that we're really finding that there's a plurality of experiences and a plurality of truths depending on where we are and how we're located. But I think fundamentally, we need to really demystify these archaic ideas of our own experiences. And that's really difficult. That doesn't happen automatically. So Kimberly, last word to you.
I'm gonna get back to what Leo was saying about you got to be anti-racist. Okay, anti-racist means that you see something, you speak up about it. Something strikes you odd, you inquire about that. It's about not letting things slide. When you see something that is like racist, inequitable, whatever it is, we all have to speak up, and speaking up is being that change that we want to see in the world. And the other thing I would add to that is that communication resides with the listener, okay? And so it's really important that we are tactful and that we consider other people's feelings and position, even if they're the most racist, snarky, whatever, they're not going to be able to hear me if I am beating them over the head with my truth bat. And this is a lesson I've been trying to learn since I was about 9 years old. My mom has been trying to drill this into me, but that's very true. And we change the world one person and one dialogue at a time. And so I would just hope that we could remember that.
Oh, so it's so funny. You took like my conclusion out from underneath me. I really do believe that the way this movement is going to change is that individual one-on-one connecting and building those bridges and then challenging each other. I would also mention that for each of us, or I'll just speak for myself, becoming, and addressing, my own racism towards other people and other ethnic minorities, including, colorism within the South Asian community. I think my own experience of challenging my own perceptions of sexism, my own perceptions of oppression, has also been part of that journey. And I think, we as, people maybe on this call or equity, social justice warriors tend to think the change happens for them when really the change happens for all of us as well. And I think that has been a real part of my learning journey too, to recognize that, we're all part of this system. We all create challenges, and we all, experience oppression, and how do we balance out those changes? And so that's really critical for me to just mention and end with. I do want to thank all of our fantastic panelists. This has been an incredible conversation. If you are looking for something to do as glass artists post-call, the conversation will be shared on the YouTube for GAS, so please do check that out. There's been some amazing books and recommendations and organizations in the chat, so please go down to the corner and check that out as well. And I just want to end, of course, by saying thank you to all of our panelists. This has been a really insightful conversation. Their websites are all located inside of the invitations that you've all been sent, so feel free to connect with them, hire them, invite them to share their own experiences with your organizations. And of course, thanks to all of you for participating, because I think these conversations, they take up time, they take up energy, and they can be challenging. And so I really appreciate everyone for listening with an open heart and open mind. And I hope you all take away something fantastic and wonderful. If you need to connect, feel free to reach out to Brandy, or of course our panelists, or of course myself. And I wish you all a good rest of your day. If you want to take yourself off mute, you're welcome to, and join me in giving me some snaps for these fantastic panelists.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent. I'm going to turn it over to Brandy. I believe you may have some announcements for upcoming and future events at GAS.
Yes, and actually, I'm going to step in for Brandy because she had to step away. But hi, everyone. My name's Jenna, if we haven't met before. I'm the Operations and Programs Manager at GAS, and just echoing exactly what Jeremy said, thank you all so much for joining. While this is the first of our community conversations focused on diversity and equity in the glass sector, it is by no means the last one. So please stay tuned as we develop this ongoing series, whether that's through our website, through our monthly GAS Digest email newsletter, and our other social media platforms. So thank you all so much, and we hope to see you next time. Bye, everyone. Have a good rest of your day, nights, mornings, wherever you're tuning in from.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. This was great.
Thanks, Kimberly. Thank you, Elmira. It was nice to meet you.
Yeah, likewise.
Very great. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thank you, Jeremy, for framing.
It was so much fun. So much fun. I'm sure we will all connect soon. Take care.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.